Nanny finds an elderly woman trapped in the basement and discovers a secret hidden for years. Jessica Carter never imagined that accepting that job as a nanny would change her life forever. The 25-year-old was desperate for an opportunity that paid well and allowed her to help her own mother with medical expenses back home in the outskirts of Cleveland. That's when she received an unexpected offer from Christopher Hayes, a respected lawyer who needed someone to care for his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, at his home in the countryside of New York. The salary offered was 3 times higher than anything she had ever earned. "It needs to be someone trustworthy who lives on the property," explained Christopher during the interview in his elegant downtown office. "My daughter needs special attention, and I travel a lot for work." Jessica didn't hesitate to accept. The house was on an isolated farm on the outskirts of Hudson Valley, surrounded by woods and far from any neighborhood. It was exactly the kind of place where she could focus on work and earn the money she so desperately needed. On the first day, Christopher personally welcomed her to the property. He was a man with an impeccable appearance, neatly styled dark hair, and always wearing expensive suits, even at home. Emma was a sweet girl, but curiously quiet for a child her age. "Emma likes to play alone in her room," explained Christopher, showing her around the house. "Sometimes she says strange things, but it's just a child's imagination. Don't pay too much attention." The house was huge and well decorated, but there was something in the air that made Jessica uncomfortable. A heavy silence hung in the hallways, as if the furniture itself held secrets. During the first few days, everything seemed normal. Christopher left early for the office and always returned late at night. Jessica took care of Emma, helped with homework and prepared meals. The girl was obedient but had the strange habit of storing food in her pocket during dinner. "What's that for, Emmy?" asked Jessica on a Wednesday, noticing the child hiding a piece of bread. "It's a secret," the girl replied, lowering her eyes. On Thursday night, Jessica was organizing the kitchen when she heard a noise coming from under the floor. It was as if someone was moving around downstairs, but she was sure there was no one in the house besides her and Emma, who was already asleep. The sound repeated on Friday, this time clearer, slow footsteps and what sounded like someone whispering. Jessica went up to Emma's room to check if the child was okay and found her awake, staring at the floor. "Emmy, did you hear anything?" she whispered. The girl shook her head no, but her eyes showed fear. On Saturday morning, Christopher announced that he needed to travel to New York and would be away the entire weekend. Jessica was alone with Emma for the first time since she arrived. "Remember what we talked about not going into certain parts of the house," said Christopher before leaving. "The basement is off-limits due to structural issues. It's dangerous to go down there." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That night, the noises from the basement became more intense. Jessica couldn't sleep, wondering what could be causing those sounds. Could it be an animal that got into the house? Maybe plumbing issues? She decided to investigate. She grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and looked for the basement entrance. She found a heavy wooden door at the end of a hallway she hadn't fully explored yet. The door was locked, but the key was hanging on a nearby hook. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it. The stairs going down were made of old wood and creaked with every step. The smell of dampness and mold filled her nostrils as she descended. What she found in the lower part of the house left her completely speechless. In a makeshift area with iron bars like a giant cage, there was an elderly lady sitting on the floor on some old blankets. The woman wore worn-out clothes, and her gray hair was disheveled. Upon seeing Jessica, the elderly woman approached the bars with difficulty. "Please, miss, get me out of here," she whispered in a hoarse voice. "I haven't done anything wrong." Jessica stepped back, frightened. Her mind tried to process what she was seeing. Who was that woman? Why was she locked up there? Could it be that Christopher? "Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice low and trembling. "I'm Dorothy. Dorothy Hayes. I'm Christopher's mother," replied the elderly woman, holding the bars with her thin hands. "He locked me in here because he says I'm sick in the head, but I'm not. I just get confused sometimes." Jessica's heart raced. Emma's grandmother was locked in her own basement as if she were an animal. How was that possible? How long have you been here? She asked, slowly moving closer. I don't know anymore. Months, maybe years. Dorothy began to cry softly. He says it's for my own good, that I might hurt myself or leave the house and get lost. But I just want to see my little granddaughter. I just want to hug Emma. At that moment, Jessica understood Emma's strange behavior. The girl knew her grandmother was down there. That's why she hid food, why she always seemed scared and sad. Does Emma know you're here? My little granddaughter is an angel. Sometimes she sneaks down and brings me food, tells me about her day at school. Dorothy smiled sadly. But she's afraid her father will find out. Jessica went up the stairs with her mind in a whirlwind. How would she confront Christopher about this? How could she continue working in that house, knowing there was an elderly lady locked in the basement? On Sunday morning, Emma woke up and found Jessica in the kitchen, visibly shaken. You went down there, didn't you? The girl asked in a low voice. Emmy, your grandmother is... she needs help. Jessica knelt down to the child's level. Why didn't you ever tell me? Daddy said that if I told anyone, he would have to take Grandma to a place far away where I'd never see her again. Emma began to cry. I'm so afraid of losing Grandma Dorothy. The situation grew more complex with each revelation. Jessica realized she was in the middle of a delicate and potentially dangerous family situation. She needed to think carefully about her next steps. Throughout that Sunday, she went down to the basement several times to bring water and food to Dorothy. The elderly woman was lucid most of the time, telling stories of when she was a teacher at the local school and how she raised Christopher alone after her husband's early departure. He was always a responsible boy, you know, Dorothy said, holding a glass of water with trembling hands. After my husband passed, Christopher had to grow up too fast. I think he still carries that with him. But why did he do this to you? It all started after I became a widow 3 years ago. I started leaving the house in the middle of the night without remembering where I was going. Once they found me walking in my nightgown on the town's main street. Christopher was ashamed, worried about what others would say. Dorothy sighed deeply. He tried to convince me to move into a private clinic, but I refused. Then he said I would come live here with him and Emma. And how did you end up here in the basement? At first everything was fine, but I kept having episodes of confusion. One night I left the house and got lost in the woods. It took hours for them to find me. Christopher panicked. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. The next morning, he said it was temporary, just until he found a better solution. That was almost 2 years ago. Jessica knew she needed to act but didn't know how. Christopher would return on Monday, and she would have to confront him somehow. The situation was delicate because she needed that job, but couldn't ignore what was happening. Monday arrived faster than she would have liked. Christopher returned promptly at 7 in the morning, as always elegantly dressed, carrying his work briefcase. How was your weekend? Did Emma behave well? He asked, pouring himself coffee in the kitchen. Mr. Christopher, I need to talk to you about something important. Jessica gathered all her courage. Of course, but be quick. I have an important hearing today. I went down to the basement yesterday and found your mother down there. Christopher's face completely transformed. The friendly expression gave way to a cold, calculating seriousness. I warned you the basement was off limits. You shouldn't have gone down there. His voice was controlled, but there was an implicit threat. Mr. Christopher, your mother needs proper medical care, not to be locked up in a cage. Jessica tried to remain calm. You don't understand the situation. My mother suffers from severe dementia. She's dangerous to herself and to Emma. I've tried every possible alternative. Christopher walked to the window, his back to Jessica. Private clinics are extremely expensive, and the public ones are a horror. This was the only solution I found. But, sir, she needs natural light, exercise, social interaction. The way she is now, her condition will only get worse. My mother was always stubborn. When I started noticing the first signs of the illness, she refused to accept any kind of help. She said she was fine, that it was just tiredness. Christopher turned to Jessica, and she could see pain in his eyes. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch your own mother slowly fading away? To see her forget your name, Leave the house in the middle of the night and not know how to get back? Jessica began to understand that the situation was much more complex than she had initially imagined. Christopher wasn't a monster, but rather a desperate son who made a terrible decision because he didn't know how to handle the situation. I understand your concern, Mr. Christopher, but there are other ways to care for her. I can help. I studied elderly care in my technical course. You don't know my mother when she has an episode. She becomes violent, breaks things, screams all night long. Once she almost set the kitchen on fire because she forgot a pan on the stove. Christopher sat down heavily in a chair. And Emma was terrified seeing her grandmother in that state. But isolating her like this isn't the solution. Mr. Christopher, with all due respect, what you're doing could be considered abuse, even if your intention is to protect. The silence that followed was tense. Christopher stared fixedly at his hands, clearly fighting an internal battle. "If you tell anyone, I'll deny everything," he said finally. "And I'll have to fire you immediately. I don't want to harm anyone, Mr. Christopher. I just want to help. Let me talk to your mother. Observe her condition better. Maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone." That afternoon, after Christopher left for work, Jessica had a long conversation with Emma. The girl told her what life was like before her grandmother was taken to the basement. "Grandma Dorothy used to teach me how to read difficult books and always made up stories at bedtime," said Emma, sadly playing with a doll. "But sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night and get confused, calling for Grandpa Walter, who died a long time ago. And when she got confused, what happened? Daddy would get very nervous. Once he yelled at Grandma and she started crying. I had never seen my father yell before." Emma wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "I think he only gets angry because he's afraid." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Over the following days, Jessica established a routine of regular visits to the basement. Dorothy proved to be an intelligent and cultured woman who had dedicated 40 years of her life to teaching. In her lucid moments, she talked about literature, history, and demonstrated an impressive memory for past events. "I was a Portuguese teacher at the city's public school," Dorothy would say, while Jessica helped comb her hair. "I taught hundreds of children to read and write over the years. Many of them still greet me on the street when I go out, or rather, when I used to. Would you like to see some of the books we have here in the house? I can bring them for you to read." "That would be wonderful, dear. It's been so long since I've read anything." Dorothy's eyes sparkled. "Christopher was my favorite student when he was a child. He always loved reading adventure and detective stories." Jessica started bringing books to Dorothy and was surprised by the elderly woman's ability to recall details of works she had read decades earlier. Clearly, her condition wasn't as severe as Christopher believed. A week later, one morning when Christopher had left early for a work trip to New York, Jessica made an important decision. She brought Dorothy up from the basement to the main floor of the house. "I don't know if we should be doing this," said Dorothy, hesitant as she climbed the stairs. "What if Christopher finds out? Let's talk calmly. You need natural light and fresh air. Just for a few hours, while he's away." Seeing Dorothy in the living room was revealing. The elderly woman moved around the house with familiarity, touching furniture and objects affectionately, as if she were reuniting with pieces of her own history. "I picked out this table myself when Christopher bought the house," she said, running her hand over the polished wood. "And that painting on the wall was my father's. Christopher brought everything from my old house here." Emma came home from school and found her grandmother in the living room. The girl's joy was impossible to contain. "Grandma Dorothy, you're up here." She ran to hug her. "My dear granddaughter." Dorothy hugged Emma tightly, tears rolling down her face. "How beautiful you've grown." Jessica watched the interaction between grandmother and granddaughter and realized that Dorothy was completely lucid at that moment. There were no signs of confusion or agitation. Quite the opposite. She seemed revitalized by being in a normal environment. "Grandma, do you want to help me with my homework?" asked Emma. "Of course, my love. What subject are you studying?" "U.S. history, about independence." Dorothy visibly perked up and began recounting the historical events with impressive detail. Jessica realized the elderly woman's mind worked perfectly when she was engaged in activities she enjoyed. That afternoon, the three of them spent hours talking. Dorothy told stories from her youth, about how she met her husband, about how she raised Christopher alone after being widowed the first time. They were stories full of life, told by a woman who clearly still had much to offer. When Christopher came home that night, he found the three of them in the living room. His expression of shock quickly turned to anger. "What's going on here?" His voice was controlled but tense. "Daddy, look. Grandma Dorothy helped me with all my homework." Emma ran to him excitedly. "She knows everything about U.S. history." "Emma, go to your room right now," said Christopher, without taking his eyes off Jessica. "But Daddy—" "Now, Emma." The girl left with her head down. Dorothy rose from the sofa, preparing to return to the basement. "Son, please let me explain," Dorothy began. "There's nothing to explain, Mother. You know you can't stay up here. It's dangerous. Mr. Christopher, your mother has been completely lucid all day. She helped Emma with her studies. We talked about various subjects. She didn't show any signs of confusion or agitation." Jessica intervened. "You don't know how she gets during the night. You haven't seen the episodes she has." Christopher approached Dorothy and took her by the arm. "Come on, Mother, time to go downstairs." "Christopher, please." Dorothy looked at her son with pleading eyes. "I feel much better when I'm up here near the family. Maybe if I spent more time away from that damp place, I'd be less confused." "Enough. I won't discuss this." Christopher began guiding Dorothy toward the basement. Jessica felt helpless watching that scene. She needed to do something, but didn't know what. She couldn't just call the authorities, as that could result in an even worse situation for Dorothy. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept imagining alternatives, ways to convince Christopher to treat his mother more humanely. She decided she needed to better understand Dorothy's medical history before making any decision. The next morning, after Christopher left for work, Jessica went down to talk with Dorothy. "Mrs. Dorothy, do you remember seeing any doctor about your condition? Is there an official diagnosis?" "Christopher took me to a private doctor 2 years ago, right after the first episode of confusion. The man talked with me for 5 minutes and said it was normal for people my age. Dorothy seemed tired. After that, my son said I needed to take some medicine that made me very sleepy." "What kind of medicine?" "I don't know. Christopher always controlled everything. He said it was for my own good." Dorothy sighed. "Since I've been down here, he hasn't given me anything, just food and water." This revealed something important to Jessica. Dorothy had been medicated inappropriately, which could have worsened her condition. Without the inappropriate medication, she seemed much more lucid. "Mrs. Dorothy, do you remember the doctor's name?" "Dr. Thompson or something like that. He had his office at a private clinic in the city center." Jessica decided to investigate. That afternoon, while Emma was at school, she called several clinics in the area asking about doctors specialized in geriatrics. She discovered there were only 2 geriatricians in the region, and one of them was named Dr. Thompson. She managed to schedule a phone conversation with the receptionist and found out Dorothy had been his patient only once, 2 years ago. The doctor noted in the record that the patient showed early signs of mental confusion related to grief, but that prolonged follow-up would be necessary to determine a correct diagnosis, explained the receptionist. She never returned for follow-up appointments. This confirmed Jessica's suspicions. Christopher had drawn hasty conclusions based on a single medical consultation, without seeking a second opinion or proper follow-up. That afternoon, when Christopher arrived home, Jessica was waiting for him in the living room with some notes. "Mr. Christopher, I need to speak with you about your mother's medical treatment. I've already said I won't discuss this. The matter is closed. Please just listen to me for 5 minutes. I contacted Dr. Thompson, the doctor who examined your mother 2 years ago." Christopher stopped in the middle of the room, visibly surprised. "According to the medical record, your mother only showed early signs of mental confusion, possibly related to grief over losing her husband. The doctor recommended prolonged follow-up, but she never returned." Jessica spoke deliberately, choosing her words carefully. "My mother refused to continue the treatment, said she wasn't sick." "But Mr. Christopher, this is common in people dealing with grief. It doesn't necessarily indicate severe dementia. Perhaps your mother just needed psychological support to overcome the loss of her husband. Christopher fell silent for a long moment, processing the information. You didn't see the episodes she had, he said finally, but his voice was less firm. One night she broke all the dishes in the kitchen because she thought there were burglars in the house. And what medications was she taking at the time? The doctor prescribed some sedatives to help with anxiety. Mr. Christopher, some medications can worsen mental confusion in elderly people, especially sedatives. It's possible that some of your mother's problems were side effects of inappropriate medication. For the first time since she had arrived at that house, Jessica saw Christopher show uncertainty. He sat down heavily on the sofa and put his head in his hands. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid she would hurt herself, that she would leave the house again and get lost in the woods. His voice came out muffled. And Emma was traumatized seeing her grandmother in that state. I understand your fear, Mr. Christopher, but isolating your mother is only making the situation worse. She needs social and mental stimulation to maintain lucidity. Jessica sat in a nearby armchair. And Emma needs her grandmother. They have a very special connection. What if I let my mother out of that basement and she has another episode? What if she hurts herself or hurts Emma? We can create a safe environment up here. Lock the outside doors at night. Adapt the house to prevent accidents. But she needs dignity, Mr. Christopher. She was a teacher for 40 years, educated hundreds of children. She deserves to be treated with respect. That night, Christopher spent hours walking around the house, clearly conflicted. Jessica could hear his footsteps in the hallway during the early hours. The next morning he found her in the kitchen before leaving for work. If I agree to try, if I let my mother come back to live up here, would you help me? He asked, avoiding looking directly at her. Of course, Mr. Christopher. We can do this gradually, see how she reacts. But at the first episode, at the first sign that it might be dangerous, she goes back to the basement. I agree, but let's give her a real chance. And we'll seek proper medical help with a geriatric specialist who understands these issues. Christopher nodded slowly. All right, we can try for a week, but you'll be responsible for watching her all the time during the day. That afternoon, Jessica went down to the basement for the last time to get Dorothy. The elderly woman could hardly believe it when she learned she could return to live on the upper floor of the house. Are you sure? Christopher really agreed? She asked, as Jessica helped her up the stairs. He's worried, but he agreed to try. Mrs. Dorothy, you need to cooperate. If you have any moments of confusion during the night, call me. Don't try to leave the house alone. I promise, dear. I just want to live my last years with dignity, near my granddaughter. Emma came home from school and found her grandmother arranging some things in the room that would be hers on the ground floor. The girl's joy was contagious. Grandma Dorothy is going to live with us again, she shouted, jumping with joy. Easy, my little granddaughter. Let's see how it goes. Your father is still worried about me. Dorothy hugged Emma affectionately. I need to prove to him that I can be a normal grandmother. During the first few days, Dorothy behaved exemplarily. She helped with small household tasks, read to Emma, talked with Jessica about various subjects. She showed no signs of confusion or agitation. Christopher came home every night visibly tense, expecting to find some problem. But as the days passed without incidents, he began to relax gradually. How is she? He would ask Jessica every day. Very well. Today she helped Emma with math and then told stories about when she was a teacher. And during the night, she sleeps peacefully. Sometimes I wake up and go check. She's always in her room, sleeping normally. After 2 weeks, Jessica noticed a significant change in Christopher. He began interacting more with his mother, still cautiously, but without the previous hostility. Mum, how was your day? He asked on a Thursday during dinner. It was great, son. Emma and I planted some flowers in the garden, and Jessica taught me how to use the new phone to talk to Mrs. Margaret, my old co-worker. You talked to Mrs. Margaret? Christopher seemed genuinely interested. Yes. She told me that several of our former students graduated from college. Bobby from the market became an engineer. Can you believe it? For the first time in a long while, Jessica saw Christopher smile genuinely at his mother. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The decisive moment came on a Friday night, 3 weeks after Dorothy had left the basement. Jessica woke up to noises coming from the kitchen. She got up worried and found Dorothy rummaging through the cabinets. "Mrs. Dorothy, what's going on?" "Oh, Jessica, I was looking for the pots to make breakfast for Walter." Dorothy seemed confused for a moment. "He'll be arriving from work hungry." Jessica's heart raced. Dorothy was having an episode of confusion, thinking her deceased husband was still alive. It was exactly the kind of situation Christopher feared. "Mrs. Dorothy, let's sit for a bit." Jessica gently guided her to the kitchen table. "Mr. Walter is no longer with us, remember? He passed away 3 years ago." "Passed away?" Dorothy seemed genuinely surprised. But I dreamed about him. It felt so real." "Sometimes we dream about people we love and it feels very real indeed. You were dreaming." "Oh, of course. Sorry, Jessica. Sometimes I get confused when I wake up in the middle of the night." Dorothy rubbed her face, looking embarrassed. "It's no problem at all, Mrs. Dorothy. Shall we go back to bed? If you'd like, I can make some chamomile tea to help you sleep better." "That would be wonderful, dear. You're so good to me." Jessica prepared the tea and accompanied Dorothy to her room. The elderly woman fell asleep quickly, apparently without further confusion. The next morning, Jessica decided to tell Christopher about the nighttime episode, but carefully. "Mr. Christopher, your mother had a brief moment of confusion last night. She woke up and for a few seconds thought your father was still alive, but I was able to guide her easily, and she went back to sleep without any issues." Christopher immediately tensed up. "You see, I warned you this could happen." "Mr. Christopher, it was just a moment." And she responded well when I explained the situation. There was no aggression or agitation. It's normal for people who've lost someone close to have episodes like this occasionally. "But what if next time she goes out looking for my father? What if she gets lost in the woods again? That's why I suggested we lock the outside doors at night, remember? And we can talk to a specialist doctor about strategies to handle these moments." Christopher fell silent, clearly wrestling with his fears. "I can't take that risk, Jessica. If anything happens to my mother because of my negligence, Mr. Christopher, the risk of something happening to her is greater if she stays isolated in the basement. The loneliness and lack of stimulation could speed up her mental decline. Up here, with proper supervision, she has a much better chance of staying lucid." "Are you sure about that?" "I am, and we can seek professional help. There are doctors specialized in elderly care who can guide us on how to handle these situations." That weekend, Jessica took the opportunity to research care for elderly individuals experiencing episodes of confusion. She discovered there were several non-pharmacological strategies that could help Dorothy. "Mr. Christopher, I found information about a day center for seniors here in the area," she said on Monday morning. "It's a place where elderly people spend a few hours of the day doing supervised activities. Your mother could socialize with people her age and keep her mind active." "Won't that be too expensive?" "Actually, it's a public service, and according to the information, they have professionals specialized in dealing with people showing early signs of mental confusion. Do you think my mother would accept it?" "Only by asking her. But I think she'd be happy to interact with other people." That afternoon, Jessica talked to Dorothy about the possibility. "A day center? How would that work?" Dorothy seemed interested. "You would spend a few mornings a week there doing activities like reading, crafts, talking with other people, and you'd return home in the late afternoon. It would be interesting to meet new people." "It's been so long since I've had a social life," Dorothy smiled. "And maybe I could help with some activity. I still remember quite a bit from my teaching years." When Christopher came home, Dorothy was excitedly telling him about the possibility of attending the day center. "Son, Jessica told me about a place where I can spend some mornings doing activities with other people my age. Would you let me go?" Christopher looked at Jessica, then at his mother. "Let's see how it works, Mom. I can call them tomorrow to get more information." The next day, Christopher called the day center and spoke at length with the coordinator. He found out that the place had specialized professionals and a structured program for people with different levels of autonomy. They said they can do an initial assessment to determine which activities would be most suitable for my mother, he told Jessica, and they have regular medical follow-up. That would be great for Mrs. Dorothy. She feels useful when she can use her experience as a teacher. The coordinator said they always need volunteers to help with reading activities. Maybe my mother can contribute with that. At the end of that week, Dorothy made her first visit to the day center. She came home beaming. "Jessica, you can't imagine how good it was," she said, excited. "I met a lady named Evelyn who was also a teacher, and the coordinator said I can help with their library, organizing books and reading stories to those who have difficulty reading." "How wonderful, Mrs. Dorothy. And how did you feel?" "Useful again. It had been so long since I felt useful." Christopher came home that night and found his mother and Emma talking animatedly in the living room about the day center. "Daddy, Grandma Dorothy met several people today and is going to help in their library," Emma said, excited. "Is that true, Mom?" asked Christopher, sitting on the sofa. "Yes, son, it was a wonderful day. And you know what else? I met Evelyn, who was the principal at the school where I worked for many years. We talked about the old days, about our former students." Dorothy smiled at her son. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity." Christopher looked at his mother with an expression Jessica had never seen before. It was pride mixed with relief. "I'm glad you enjoyed it, Mom." That night, after Dorothy and Emma went to sleep, Christopher sought out Jessica in the kitchen. "I need to apologize," he said, avoiding looking directly at her. "For what, Mr. Christopher?" "For everything. Because you treated my mother that way, because you threatened to fire you when you tried to help me." He sat down at the kitchen table. "I was so afraid of losing my mother that I ended up losing her in a much worse way. You were trying to protect her the only way you knew how. It's not easy to deal with these situations, especially alone. My father died when I was a teenager, and my mother was everything to me. She worked twice as hard to give me an education, supported me through all the difficult times." Christopher's voice was filled with emotion. "When I started seeing signs that she was getting confused, I panicked. I couldn't accept that my strong, intelligent mother was changing. And you tried to protect her the only way you could imagine at the time, but now we see there are better alternatives. If you hadn't come here, if you hadn't had the courage to confront me, I would have kept doing that to her indefinitely." Christopher shook his head. "What kind of son am I? You're a son who loves his mother and was doing what he thought was right, even if it wasn't the best decision. What matters is that we've found a better path now. Jessica, I'd like you to continue working here, but not just as Emmy's nanny. I want you to help us take care of my mother too. I can increase your salary and—" "Mr. Christopher, I'd be honored to continue here. Your family has become very special to me." In the following weeks, the household dynamics changed completely. Dorothy attended the day center 3 times a week and gradually regained much of her self-esteem and sense of purpose. At home, she helped Emmy with her studies and shared stories from her experience as an educator. Christopher began spending more time at home, participating in family conversations during dinner. Jessica watched as the relationship between mother and son gradually rebuilt itself. "Son, do you remember when you were little and I used to read to you before bed?" Dorothy asked one evening. "Of course, Mom. You always made up stories about dragons and brave princesses. Today I told one of those stories to the children at the day center. They loved it. You've always been a great storyteller. Can I tell one to Emmy tonight?" I'm sure she'd love that. Emmy, who had witnessed the conversation, clapped excitedly. "Grandma Dorothy, tell the one about the dragon that protected the library." That night, Jessica watched through the slightly open door as Dorothy told a story to Emmy, with Christopher sitting in a nearby armchair, smiling as he listened to his mother. It was a normal family scene, something that had seemed impossible just a few months earlier. 2 months after coming up from the basement, Dorothy had another episode of confusion, this time during the day. Jessica was in the kitchen when she heard Dorothy talking to herself in the living room. "Where are my students? They should have arrived for Portuguese class." Dorothy was standing in the middle of the room looking disoriented. "Mrs. Dorothy," Jessica approached calmly. "Oh, Jessica, can you tell me where the children are? It's time for class to start." Jessica took a deep breath and remembered the guidelines she had read about how to handle these moments. "Mrs. Dorothy, there are no classes today. Today is Saturday. You're at home resting." "Saturday?" Dorothy seemed confused for a few seconds. "Oh, of course, and I'm sorry. Sometimes I get mixed up with the days of the week." "That's perfectly fine. It happens to everyone. Would you like to have some coffee with me?" "That would be lovely, dear." While preparing the coffee, Jessica watched Dorothy gradually return to the present moment. Within minutes, she was completely lucid again. When Christopher came home that afternoon, Jessica told him about the episode. "How did she react when you explained?" "Very well. There was no agitation or resistance. And within a few minutes she was normal again. Is this happening more frequently?" "Actually, it's been rare, and when it does happen, she recovers quickly. It's very different from the episodes you described before. Perhaps the stimulating environment is really helping." "I believe so, and she's been feeling much happier and useful." That evening during dinner, Dorothy brought exciting news. "The Day Center coordinator invited me to give a talk about literacy methods," she announced, beaming. "They're bringing some young teachers to hear about what education was like in the old days." "What an honor, Mom," said Christopher, genuinely proud. "Will you tell them about how you taught Dad to read?" asked Emma. "I certainly can, my dear granddaughter. Your father was a very dedicated student, but somewhat stubborn." Dorothy laughed, looking affectionately at Christopher. "I wasn't stubborn, Mom. I was determined." Christopher laughed too. Jessica smiled, watching this affectionate exchange. The family had found a balance that seemed natural and healthy. 3 months later, Dorothy had an appointment with a specialist geriatrician Christopher had found in New York. The doctor conducted a complete evaluation and confirmed what Jessica already suspected. "Mrs. Dorothy shows very mild signs of cognitive decline, possibly related to age and prolonged grief," explained Dr. Thompson. "But her current condition is much better than would be expected for someone with severe dementia." "Doctor, she's had some episodes of confusion," said Christopher. "Occasional episodes of disorientation can be normal for people her age, especially considering the emotional trauma she's been through. The important thing is that she maintains autonomy, relates well socially, and has a good quality of life." "And what can we do to maintain this condition?" "Exactly what you're already doing. Keeping her socially active with mentally stimulating activities in a loving family. The environment she's in now is ideal for her well-being." "And if she worsens over time?" "If there's deterioration, it will be gradual, and you can adapt care as needed. But for now, Mrs. Dorothy is very well cared for." Leaving the appointment, Christopher seemed relieved. "Thank you for insisting that I seek proper medical help," he said to Jessica on the way back. "You made the right decision. Now we know exactly what Mrs. Dorothy's situation is and how to care for her in the best way. To think that for almost 2 years I kept her in that basement out of fear of a diagnosis that wasn't even correct." "Mr. Christopher, what matters is that she's well now, and you've learned that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness." That evening, Dorothy gave her first talk at the day center. The whole family attended. Jessica watched Dorothy speaking passionately about education, sharing decades of experience with an attentive audience of young educators. "To educate is to plant seeds of knowledge that will grow throughout a lifetime," Dorothy said, standing before the group. "Every child who passes through our hands takes a little piece of our soul with them." At the end of the talk, several teachers approached Dorothy to ask questions and share experiences. Jessica saw Christopher's eyes filling with tears of pride. "My mother has always been special," he whispered to Jessica. "I had just forgotten that." In the following months, the family's routine stabilized harmoniously. Dorothy continued attending the day center, where she had become a beloved and respected volunteer. At home, she actively participated in family life, helping Emma with her studies and sharing her wisdom with everyone. Jessica realized her role had evolved far beyond just being a nanny. She had become a bridge between the generations of the Hayes family, helping Christopher reconnect with his mother and ensuring that Emma grew up knowing and valuing her grandmother. "Jessica, can I ask you a question?" Emma said one afternoon. "Of course, Emmy." Do you think my dad is a bad person for what he did to Grandma Dorothy? The question took Jessica by surprise. It was a complex issue to explain to an 8-year-old. Your dad isn't a bad person, Emmy. He was very scared and didn't know how to handle Grandma's situation. Sometimes good people do wrong things when they're afraid. But he apologized and changed, right? Exactly. And that shows he's a good person. Bad people don't apologize or change. I've forgiven my dad, and I think Grandma Dorothy has too. I'm sure she has. Forgiveness is very important in families. During that conversation, Jessica realized how much Emma had matured over those months. The girl had witnessed a profound family transformation and developed impressive emotional wisdom for her age. 6 months after leaving the basement, the Hayes family organized a small party to celebrate Dorothy's 72nd birthday. They invited friends from the day center, former students who heard about the party through acquaintances, and some neighbors from town. "I can't believe so many people remembered me," Dorothy said, moved, seeing the room full of loved ones. "Mrs. Dorothy, you've touched many lives over the years as a teacher," Jessica replied, fixing the birthday girl's hair. "It's only natural these people want to be here today." During the party, Jessica watched Dorothy at the center of attention, telling stories, laughing, hugging people she had taught decades earlier. It was impossible to imagine that vibrant, sociable woman had spent nearly 2 years isolated in a damp basement. "Mrs. Dorothy, do you remember me? I'm John Michael. I was your student in the 90s, said a middle-aged man approaching with his family. "John Michael, of course I remember. You were the boy who loved reading about dinosaurs." Dorothy hugged him warmly. "And this beautiful family of yours?" "Yes, my wife and children. I wanted them to meet the teacher who taught me to love reading." Scenes like this repeated throughout the party. Jessica realized the impact Dorothy had on the local community through her work as an educator. Christopher approached Jessica during the party. "You saved my mother," he said, emotional, "and our family. I just helped you find a better path. The strength to change came from you. If you hadn't had the courage to confront me, to insist there were alternatives." Christopher looked at his mother, surrounded by loved ones. "My mother could have spent the rest of her life in that basement. But that didn't happen. And now look at her, look at your family. It's true, and much of that is thanks to you. I'm happy to have been part of this transformation." At the end of the party, when all the guests had left, the family gathered in the living room for a quiet conversation. "It was the best birthday of my life," Dorothy said, still radiant. "It had been years since I felt so loved and valued." "You deserve all this affection, Grandma," Emma said, hugging her grandmother. "Mom, I want to apologize once more for everything I did," Christopher said, his voice filled with emotion. "I promise I'll never make decisions about your life without talking to you first. Son, you've apologized many times. I forgave you long ago." Dorothy took Christopher's hand. "You were trying to protect me the only way you knew. Now we know there are better ways. And I learned that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness." "Exactly. And families help each other." Jessica watched that scene with a full heart. The family she had found, fragmented by fear and misunderstanding, was now united by love and mutual respect. 1 year after that first meeting in the basement, Jessica reflected on everything that had happened. Dorothy continued attending the day center, where she had become one of the most beloved volunteers. She gave regular talks about education and had started writing her memoirs with Emma's help. Christopher had learned to better balance work and family, spending more time at home and actively participating in the lives of his mother and daughter. He also occasionally volunteered at the day center, helping with legal matters for other family members of seniors. Emma had become a more confident and empathetic child, clearly benefiting from growing up in a united and loving family. She and Dorothy maintained a special relationship, with the grandmother always willing to help with studies and share fascinating stories. "Jessica, sometimes I think about what would have happened if you hadn't come here," said Dorothy on a quiet afternoon, while the two organized books in the makeshift library they had created at home. "I prefer to think about what actually happened, Mrs. Dorothy. You are here, strong, healthy, surrounded by love." "It's true. And do you know what else makes me happy?" "What?" "Seeing how Christopher has changed. He was a sensitive boy when he was little, but years of early responsibility made him build emotional walls. Now he's returning to be that caring son I knew. People can change when they find the right environment for it. And you gave us that environment. You taught us that true love isn't overprotection, but respect and proper care. That evening, during dinner, Dorothy made a special announcement. "I finished writing the first chapter of my memoirs," she said excitedly. "Would you like me to read it to you?" "Of course, Grandma," said Emma. "I'd love to hear it, Mom," said Christopher. Dorothy took some handwritten pages and began to read. "My name is Dorothy Hayes. I am 72 years old, and I want to tell the story of how I almost lost everything that was important in my life, and how the love of a united family brought me back into the light. For nearly 2 years I lived in a darkness that was not only physical, but also emotional. My son, driven by love and fear, believed that keeping me isolated would be the way to protect me. I, in turn, began to believe that there really was something deeply wrong with me. It was when a brave young woman named Jessica arrived at our home. She saw beyond the apparent madness of a family that had lost its way in fear. With patience, wisdom, and much affection, she showed us that there were other paths. Today, as I write these words, I can say that I am a fulfilled woman. I have a son who respects me, a granddaughter who adores me, and an extended family of friends and former students who make me feel valuable every day. I learned that aging doesn't mean losing value or dignity. I learned that family is about caring for each other with love and respect, not with fear and overprotection. And I learned that it's never too late to start over." When Dorothy finished reading, there were tears in everyone's eyes. "Mom, this book will help many families going through similar situations," said Christopher. "That is my hope, son. I want others to know that there is always a better way, even when everything seems lost." "Can I help you write more chapters, Grandma?" asked Emma. "Of course, my little granddaughter. Your questions always help me remember important details." That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Jessica stayed on the porch contemplating the stars. She thought about the extraordinary journey she had lived with that family. She had arrived merely as a nanny needing a job, but had become part of a transformation that changed all their lives. Her phone rang. It was her mother calling from Cleveland. "Hi, honey, how are you?" "I'm fine, Mom, really fine." "And your work? You sound happy when you talk about this family." "I am happy here, Mom. I've found my place in the world." "That's wonderful, my dear. You've always had a heart too big for the world. It's good to know you've found people who value that." After hanging up, Jessica smiled to herself. Her mother was right. She had found much more than a job in that house. She had found a family that loved and respected her, and the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of special people. 2 years after that first day in the basement, the Hayes family home had become an example in the local community of how to handle elderly care in a humane and respectful way. Dorothy had become a kind of informal counselor for other families facing similar challenges. "Mrs. Dorothy, my mother-in-law is also having episodes of confusion. What do you think we should do?" asked a neighbor who came to visit her. "The first thing is to seek proper medical evaluation with a geriatric specialist and never make decisions without talking to her," Dorothy always answered patiently. "Remember that elderly people with mental confusion are still people with dignity and rights. But what if she refuses to accept help? That's where the family's patience and affection come in. Sometimes it takes a while, but with love and persistence, we find a way to help." Jessica watched these conversations with pride. Dorothy had transformed her difficult experience into a source of help for others. Christopher had also gotten involved with issues related to elderly rights. He began offering free legal consulting for families who needed to resolve matters related to senior care. "I learned firsthand how easy it is to make wrong decisions when we're desperate," he explained to Jessica. "Now I want to help other families avoid making the same mistakes." Emma, now 10 years old, had become an exceptionally mature and empathetic child. She often helped Dorothy with activities at the day center and showed genuine interest in caring for elderly people. "When I grow up, I want to work with grandpas and grandmas like you do," she said one afternoon while helping Jessica organize Dorothy's medications. "That would be a beautiful profession, Emmy. Caring for elderly people is one of the most important things there is. Grandma Dorothy taught me that old people have lots of wisdom to share, and that we have to treat them with kindness. Your grandmother is indeed very wise. And you too, Jessica. You saved our family. We saved each other, Emmy. Everyone did their part. On a particularly quiet Sunday afternoon, the family was gathered in the living room when Dorothy shared a profound reflection. Do you know I'm grateful every day for everything that happened? What do you mean, Mom? Grateful for the difficult times too? Asked Christopher. Yes, son. Grateful even for the time I spent in the basement. Why, Grandma? Asked Emma, curious. Because if I hadn't gone through that darkness, maybe we would never have learned to value the light. If our family hadn't almost fallen apart, maybe we would never have discovered how strong the love that binds us is. That's an interesting perspective, said Jessica. Besides, now I can help other people going through similar situations. My pain has turned into purpose. You always find the positive side of things, observed Christopher. That's what I've learned over 72 years of life, son. We can't change what happened in the past, but we can choose how to use those experiences to build a better future. That night, Jessica wrote in her personal diary something she had started doing after arriving at that house. Today marks exactly 2 years since I found Mrs. Dorothy in the basement. It feels like an eternity, yet at the same time it feels like yesterday. This family taught me that miracles happen when people have the courage to change and the willingness to love without fear. Christopher transformed from a man controlled by fear into a loving and present father and son. Dorothy emerged from literal and figurative darkness to become a light in many people's lives. Emma grew up in a united family and learned values she'll carry forever. And me? I discovered my life's purpose. I came here just looking for a job, but found a calling. I discovered I have the gift of helping families reconnect, of being a bridge between generations. Tomorrow I'll start a specialization course in elderly care. Christopher offered to pay, but I got a scholarship. I want to improve myself to help even more families going through similar situations. I don't know what the future holds, but I know every day with this extraordinary family is a gift. 3 years after the story began, the Hayes family home had become a community landmark. Dorothy had officially launched her memoir, which had become essential reading for family members of elderly people and professionals in the field. The day center where Dorothy volunteered had created a special program based on the methodologies she developed during her years as a teacher. Elderly people with varying degrees of independence participated in educational and social activities that stimulated the mind and strengthened self-esteem. Teacher Dorothy, the program you created is being replicated at other day centers in the region, the coordinator mentioned one morning. How wonderful. It's rewarding to know our experience can help others. Would you be interested in giving lectures elsewhere? We've received invitations from New York, Los Angeles, even from other states. Of course, as long as I have health and energy, I'll keep sharing what I've learned. Christopher had expanded his volunteer work and created an NGO that offered free legal counseling and psychological support for families facing challenges related to elderly care. How did the idea for this NGO come about? Asked a local journalist during an interview. My family went through a very difficult situation a few years ago. I almost made irreversible mistakes because I didn't know how to properly handle my mother's health condition, Christopher answered honestly. I learned that many families face similar dilemmas and need guidance and support. And what's the organization's main mission? To ensure no family has to go through the same mistakes we did. We offer information, emotional support and practical resources to care for elderly people with dignity and love. Emma, now a teenager, had become a young person engaged in social causes. She often accompanied Dorothy and Christopher in their volunteer activities and had developed impressive emotional maturity. "Dad, can I ask you something?" she said one morning. "Of course, honey. Do you regret what happened with Grandma a few years ago?" Christopher stopped what he was doing and looked seriously at his daughter. "That's a complex question, Emmy. I deeply regret making that decision and causing my mother to suffer. But I don't regret what that experience taught us as a family." "What do you mean?" "If we hadn't gone through those difficult moments, we might never have learned to truly communicate, to support each other, to value the time we have together. And Jessica. If it weren't for her, if it weren't for Jessica, our family might have been lost forever. She taught us that courage sometimes means confronting the people we love when they're making wrong decisions. I want to be like her when I grow up. Like Jessica? Yes, someone who has the courage to help families reunite, someone who looks beyond problems and sees solutions. Christopher smiled proudly at his daughter. I'm sure you'll achieve it, my dear. You already have the heart and wisdom needed. That afternoon, the whole family gathered for a special celebration. Jessica had completed her specialization course and would officially receive her diploma. I'm so proud of you, said Dorothy, hugging Jessica. When you arrived here, you were already special. Now you're even more prepared to help other families. Thank you, Mrs. Dorothy. Everything I learned started by observing you and this family. And now you'll be able to help many other people, said Christopher. I have a proposal for you. What proposal? I want you to coordinate our NGO's family support program. It would be a paid position, and you could continue living here with us if you'd like. Really? Jessica's eyes shone. Absolutely. You understand better than anyone the challenges families face in these situations, and you have the natural gift of helping people find solutions. I'd love to. It would be a dream come true. Then it's decided, said Emma, jumping with joy. That night, after the celebration, Dorothy sought out Jessica on the porch where she usually sat before bed. May I sit with you? Of course, Mrs. Dorothy. Always. The two remained silent for a few minutes, contemplating the stars. Jessica, I want to tell you something I've never told anyone. What is it, Mrs. Dorothy? During those months in the basement, I prayed every day asking God to send someone who could help us. Someone who had the courage and wisdom to show my son that there was a better path. And you think I was the answer to that prayer? I'm sure of it. You arrived here exactly at the right moment with exactly the right qualities to save our family. I only did what anyone with heart would do. No, dear. Many people would have pretended not to see anything, or would have simply left the house. You had the courage to get involved, to risk your job to do what was right. You would have done the same for me. Yes, I would, and that's why we're family, not just people living in the same house. Jessica felt tears forming in her eyes. Mrs. Dorothy, may I confess something? Of course. When I arrived here, I was at a very difficult point in my life. I desperately needed work. But more than that, I needed to feel that I had value, that I could make a difference in someone's life. And you did much more than that. You saved an entire family. You saved me too. You gave me purpose, helped me discover my vocation, made me feel loved and valued. Then we were made for each other. We certainly were. Dorothy took Jessica's hand and the two remained there, in comfortable silence, connected by a love that transcended blood ties. 5 years after that first discovery in the basement, the Hayes family's story had become an inspiring example that resonated far beyond their local community. Dorothy's book had been reprinted several times and translated into other languages. Christopher's NGO had helped hundreds of families find humane solutions for elderly care. Jessica had become a national reference in family mediation and intergenerational care. She traveled across the country, giving lectures and trainings, always returning home on weekends to be with the family that had adopted her. Do you know today is a special day, said Dorothy one Saturday morning. Why, Grandma? Asked Emma, now a 15-year-old young woman. It's been exactly 5 years today since Jessica found me in the basement. Wow, has it really been that long? Said Christopher, joining the conversation. 5 years that changed everything in our lives, Jessica agreed. Can we celebrate? Suggested Emma. How do you want to celebrate? Asked Dorothy. How about we have a gathering here at our house with all the families you've helped over these years? A big get-together. What a wonderful idea, said Christopher. Let's organize it, agreed Jessica excitedly. 2 weeks later, the Hayes family home was full of people of all ages. Families who had found solutions to their problems thanks to the example and support of the Hayeses, filled every room of the house. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" said Christopher in the middle of the room. Everyone turned to him. "I want to thank you all for coming and share something important. 5 years ago, our family was completely lost. I had made a terrible decision, driven by fear and ignorance." "Daddy," began Emma. "Let me finish, honey." Christopher smiled at her. "If it weren't for the courage of a young babysitter named Jessica, who had the audacity to confront me and show me there was a better way, my mother might have spent the rest of her life trapped in a basement." Emotional murmurs spread through the room. But this story isn't about my mistakes. It's about how true love and the courage to do what's right can transform any situation. It's about how families can heal when they choose the path of dialogue and mutual respect. And it's about how one brave person can change the fate of an entire family, added Dorothy, standing up. "All of you here today are proof that our experience had a purpose. Every family that found a better solution, every elderly person who regained their dignity, every relationship that was repaired, it's all part of a chain of transformation that started that night when Jessica went down to our basement." The applause was long and emotional. Jessica stood up, visibly moved. "I don't have words to express what this family means to me." Her voice was choked up. "I came here just looking for work, but I found much more than that. I found my purpose, my calling, and a family that loves me unconditionally. But more importantly, I learned that we all have the power to make a difference in other people's lives. Sometimes it takes courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. Sometimes we need to confront people we love when they're lost. Each of you here today had the courage to seek help when you needed it, to admit you didn't know how to handle difficult situations alone. And that's an act of love, not weakness. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your healing and transformation journeys. Thank you for proving that love always finds a way." More applause echoed through the house. "Now let's celebrate," shouted Emma, and the party resumed with even more joy. That night, after all the guests had left, the family gathered in the living room for a quiet conversation. "It was a perfect day," said Dorothy, smiling. "It really was," agreed Christopher. "Seeing all those families who managed to overcome their challenges, it's so rewarding." "Dad, can I ask you a kind of philosophical question?" said Emma. "Of course, honey. Do you think bad things that happen in life have some purpose? Or are they just bad?" Christopher thought for a moment. "I think bad things themselves don't have purpose, but what we do with them, how we choose to respond to them, that can have a lot of purpose." "How so?" "Well, what happened to our family was terrible. I made serious mistakes that caused a lot of suffering. That in itself had nothing positive. But the way we choose to handle those mistakes, how we decide to learn and grow from them, how we use our experience to help other people, that does have purpose." "I understand," said Emma thoughtfully. "It's like Grandma always says," added Jessica. "We can't change the past, but we can choose how to use our experiences to build a better future." "Exactly," agreed Dorothy. "And sometimes our worst experiences become our greatest sources of wisdom." That night, Jessica went to the room that had truly been hers for years. On the bedside table, there was a photo of the family gathered on the day of the party. She looked at those smiling faces and realized how much everyone had changed and grown over those 5 years. Christopher had become a more open and emotional man, able to express feelings and ask for help when needed. Dorothy had not only regained her dignity, but discovered she still had much to offer the world. Emma had grown up in a close-knit family and developed strong values about respect and compassion. And her? Jessica smiled to herself. She had found her place in the world, her reason for being. More than that, she had discovered that an ordinary person with courage and love in their heart can truly change the fate of an entire family. She picked up her journal and wrote her final words about that extraordinary journey. 5 years have passed since I found Mrs. Dorothy in the basement. Today, seeing everyone gathered at our party, I realized that what happened here was much bigger than the transformation of one family. It was the beginning of a chain of healing that spread to hundreds of other families. I learned that miracles are not supernatural events. Miracles are ordinary people who choose to do what's right, even when it's hard. Miracles are families who choose love over fear, dialogue over isolation, hope over despair. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that every day with this extraordinary family is a gift. And I know that wherever life takes me, I will always carry the lessons I learned here, that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, that true love sometimes requires courage, and that it's never too late to start over. This is the story of how a family got lost in fear and found each other again in love, and of how a young nanny discovered that her destiny wasn't just to care for children, but to care for entire families. End of story. Now tell me, what was your favorite part of this story? Have you ever experienced a similar situation in your family? Leave your comment sharing your honest opinion, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.